Hello, and welcome to the demonstration for the India ink and wash techniques. Let's get started by grabbing some materials. You will need this worksheet right here. If you do not have it, you can use a piece of cardstock. You will also need paper towels and a cup of water. You will need a palette for mixing different values of ink, some black India ink. We will also be using a dip pen, a paintbrush for creating washes, and some material for creating resists, such as tape, salt, a wax resist, such as a crayon, and rubbing alcohol. Okay, now that you have all your supplies, let's go ahead and get started. We are going to start by creating various values to work with. The way ink works is that the more you dilute it with water, the lighter the value is going to be. Less water will create a darker value. Go ahead and add a little bit of black ink into one of your little circles in your palette. Let's go ahead and make 3 different values. Our first value will be our darkest, which will be the ink that is straight out of the bottle. Then we're going to take some water and add it to 2 different circles in the palette. Now you can apply water just by using your brush and bringing it over, or you can end up pouring it into one of the circles. I also like to use a little squeeze bottle to squeeze in water. Create different levels of water. You'll see that in the first one I have more water than I have in the second one. Now I'm going to take my brush, dip it into my ink, and then bring it over to each one of the pools of water. And now that we have 3 different values, we are ready to get started on our worksheet. First is our ink wash gradient. A gradient is like a value scale that slowly goes from dark to light or light to dark. A wash is diluted ink that creates a semi-transparent layer. To create a wash, we start by applying water directly to the paper. Now, just like watercolor, ink will bleed, so you want to make sure you have control of where you're putting the ink and where you're putting the water. Now I'm going to go dark to light, so I'm starting with my darkest value. Then I'm going to go to my second value and apply that down, and I'm going to finish with my lightest value. You can always grab more water to make it lighter, and you can always pick up more ink to make it darker. To get that smooth gradient, what you can do is just take your brush and kind of pull it from the left to the right. That will help you get that smooth transition. Next we have is dry brush. Make sure your paintbrush is nice and dry. For this technique, we are basically going to just draw with the brush. Your surface must be completely dry before doing this, or your ink's going to bleed. Practice some brush control and experiment with trying to apply different lines. And even try to draw. And just like a pen, the less pressure you apply to the brush, the thinner the line. The more pressure you apply to the brush, the thicker the line. You can also practice with different types of brush sizes. Moving right along, we're going to go ahead and start wet into wet. Let's put down a background wash by applying a light value down. Now, before this dries, we're going to go ahead and add some ink to it. So go ahead and drip in some ink, try drawing in some ink, and let's see what happens. What you'll notice is that the ink bleeds just like watercolor does. Now, this is a really cool technique to use when you're trying to get like a soft transition or some cool effects in your artwork. It is unpredictable, so you will need a paper towel nearby when doing this technique. Next is sponging. Now you can use an actual sponge, but you can also just use a piece of paper towel that's wadded up as well. I'm going to take that paper towel and dip it directly into my ink and just kind of stamp it. This makes a great texture that can be used for animal fur. It can also be used for plants in a landscape. It could be used for clouds. Let's continue on with our experimentation and try some different resists. Grab your tape and your crayon for your wax resist. Let's go ahead and rip off a few pieces of tape and apply it to the rectangle labeled tape. Add the tape however you like and make a cool design with it. For the wax resist, we're going to be using a crayon. You can also use a pastel. If you happen to have a white crayon, try to use that. Take your crayon and do a drawing with it. Now that we have both the crayon resist down and the tape resist down, we're ready to go ahead and apply some ink. We are going to take our ink and go ahead and apply it right on top of both the crayon and the tape. You'll see that the crayon resist works right away. You should be able to see the drawing that you did come through. For the tape resist, we're just going to apply the ink right on top, and you have to let it dry before removing the tape. Next, we're going to go ahead and try a salt resist. This time I'm going to apply the ink first and then apply the salt. Again, you're going to want to do this while the ink is wet, so make sure the salt is ready to go. Once you place the salt on the ink, let it dry. The salt will absorb the ink and leave a really cool texture. Our last resist we're going to do with rubbing alcohol. Apply a wash of ink onto your paper and drip some rubbing alcohol right into it. You will see that it reacts right away by resisting the ink. Now that we've experimented and learned all these techniques, let's go ahead and practice. We are going to try to draw the dog that is on the left on the right. First, we're going to lightly sketch the dog out in pencil. Now that our sketch is complete, we are ready to start with some ink. Our goal is to try to match the value of the picture. Let's start with a background wash. The background must dry before I apply more ink next to it or it's going to bleed. While that's drying, I'm going to go ahead and start with the inside of the dog. Looking at the photo, the ears are fairly dark, and so are some features in the nose and the mouth. I'm going to let this part dry and jump up to the eyes. And since this dog is white, I'm going to try to get very light values on the dog's fur. There's a little bit of a shadow on the neck and chest of the dog. Everything else should stay fairly light. Now that the dog is all inked up, let's give it some time to dry. While that's drying, let's jump back to our resist. Looking at the crayon resist, you can see that the crayon is very bold now that it's dry. We can remove the tape from the tape resist. And what you will see that the tape left a nice clean white paper. Now that my dog is dry, let's go ahead and jump back to it and add some details. I could go back in and use a dry brush to add details, or you can also use a dip pen. To use a dip pen, go ahead and dip your pen directly into the ink. You are going to want to make sure that the small hole is facing up when you're using the pen. The more pressure you add on the pen, the wider the line. The less pressure you add onto the pen, the thinner the line. I'm going to give this dog a nice clean outline, and I'm going to add some hatching lines and cross hatching lines for some contrast. Wow, what a difference. The pen really makes that dog pop. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed learning these ink wash techniques. Thank you for watching.